Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International here. We're starting up in the second round in the upper finals between Method NA and Abrakeydabra here. The number 2 and 3 seeds going head-to-head to see who will be facing off against the number 1 seed, the 2-time champion in Method EU. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk right now, we've got Sloot, Tettles, and Sours here. And at this point, guys, we got to get some predictions going on in this one. Sloot, who do you think's taking this series?
Can't look at this guy seriously anymore. I predict that, well, I don't know. If we're going to go by paper, which I know Sours likes to do, I'm going to go with Method NA. They've just been more dominant. It's weird. There's just this situation of Abrakeydabra performs so on time trials. They have frequently taken the second spot in many of these dungeons, but haven't managed to just live up to it on live broadcast. I'm not exactly sure why. So if they get out of their funk, they will be able to finally pull it off. If not, then I think Method NA is just had such a powerhouse performance, especially in the second half of last cup that they did.
Yeah, I actually believe that Method NA is going to end up taking it. JB being the big X factor here, sitting in JB form, DPSing a pretty significant amount of time. I actually believe that ends up allowing Method NA to have a pretty significant advantage in a lot of the dungeons over Elserat. As we do know, Elserat not super fond of JB form, not DPSing a ton, but I think that will allow Method NA to pull ahead a little bit more.
I'm going to have to agree again with all of you guys. I think Method NA is going to, it's going to go to the third map. Historically, all of these games have gone to 3. Method NA has won more of them, but every single time these two teams have fought, they've always gone the distance. So I think it's going to be Method NA map 1, Abrakeydabra map 2, and then Method NA map 3. And it's really going to come down to the healers. I think if the healers can kind of put on their A game, then it could change. It could be a 2-0 either way. But in the event that there is some sort of healer catastrophe, be it a JB or an Elserat catastrophe or anything else possibly going wrong in these dungeons, then it could change. But I think a 1-1-1 with Method NA taking it at the very end is probably the most likely outcome here.
Yeah, King's Rest, if anything, is going to be the map to really watch out for because there is so much pressure on the healers with Tyrannical and Grievous. We were just seeing earlier, Sloot, all the pressure on Zalia there going down in the first boss and tons of pressure onto the third there. Yeah, I mean, if the healer just runs out of gas too early on the Golden Serpent, with that Spit Gold kind of snowballing into some of the Grievous, especially if the tank is not mining their stacks as well as they can really on a prot where it's going to be a lot of trouble for them. So we'll see if they kind of hiccup on that, but a large portion of it is really going to be decided by that first room pull that we know. Is it going to be a full room pull? Is it going to be a 2 pull? Yeah, and at that point we keep seeing, big variance in between performance, even if they're constantly doing it. We've had some weeks, especially in the East, where one-time Battle for Champion is completely scuffing a dungeon, and the next they're just running through the King's Rest without a problem here. Method NA has the vote from Twitch chat at 54% as we're diving into the depths of King's Rest after we get a quick reset before we go into it here, so not quite ready just yet. Sloot, looking at this one, how do you see Method NA so far from what we've seen? We haven't seen too much from this tournament this weekend, but so far we've always kind of talked about them as the team that is supposed to step up to Method EU. They're supposed to be able to play up to this level, and they've kind of gotten really close to that, but at this point, this has got to be their last cup before LAN, and it's got to be their chance to prove themselves. Yeah, I mean, we know a lot of the guys on this team. We know JB. We know what kind of mentality they have. We've talked about the 2 different team mentalities. I want to be the best versus I just want to squeeze by and try and get to LAN. And these are just guys that are not happy with being second. They don't like constantly being under Method EU's shadow. They want to get out of that funk. They want to be the one that takes the Titan down. So, they're hungry for it. Whereas on the side of Abrakeydabra, I'm not really sure what their story is at the moment. They know, obviously they want to perform as well as possible. I know these are guys that are hungry for those top spots, but they just haven't been able to get it together, and I'm not sure if at this point in the cup they're just saying, okay, we're likely going to qualify for LAN, let's just get through with it and then shape up for the LAN, and we'll see from there. But we'll see what version of them we're going to get here versus Method NA. Yeah, at this point, I mean, Night rises and so does Count J, so at this point they're going to need every little advantage they can get on this one, Tettles, and they really haven't been that super consistent, super solid team that we want to be able to see out of them, but you think you got to be able to make a statement here on King's Rest, map 1. Yeah, we definitely need to see Abrakeydabra really stepping up in King's Rest map 1. They need to be able to do the whole entire Golden Serpent room pull all in one, like we were stating earlier, with it being Tyrannical and Skittish. Like, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to do that pull, especially if you're running double rogue on like a Skittish week. So seeing both teams be able to step up and really perform and like play to win is very important here. Now we are all set and ready to get going in Game 1 between Method NA and Abrakeydabra in King's Rest.
Titles, it's all going to come down really to that first pull, as we've said multiple times in the room. I'm curious to see what they're going to do. Now, I can't remember in past weeks if either of these two teams ended up doing the full room pull or just kind of doing a 3-pack followed by the 1-pack, getting ready for the Golden Serpent. But we're about to find out here as both teams head down the stairs, pop that first mass stealth, and head on through to the Golden Serpent's room, right past these two Guardians. Keep them in mind, of course, we will likely see them during that gauntlet.
Yeah, it's also something to note that Divine Field is actually playing Night Elf from the looks of it on our screen here. So basically with Grievous, if you actually were playing a different race, you would be able to get that Grievous off you, notably Dwarf. So you actually do see Divine Field positioning himself, looking to be able to get all of those mobs, those Shadows of Zul killed very quickly, as you do see Bloodlust coming out for the side of Abrakeydabra and Method NA.
And it's the full room pull on both sides, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of damage coming in. Bloodlust has been popped, as quoted here by Tettles. There's going to be a lot of kiting needed from the tank soon enough, and you have to be careful with these tornadoes that are coming out from both sides of the team. Nerf Clap already opting to go pretty defensive here, has Heroic left out of the group as the rest of them help with Typhoon and Ursul's Vortex, keeping those mobs away from him as long as possible just to make sure that they get in. Abrakeydabra on the side. Divine Field hasn't really left himself that much space. He's already rushed out as soon as the champion's enraged and has already rushed back in. Most of the mobs finally are dying now. Method and A 17% on the board, about to proc their first reaping. Abrakeydabra just a bit slower as they continue to kite away. Divine Field does not want that early death.
Yeah, so even though Divine Field is actually doing a little bit more damage than Nerf on the side of Method NA, the mobs just get kind of separated out very quickly for the side of Abrakeydabra as opposed to Method NA, making the pull take a little bit longer for them. So basically, we did see that Ring of Peace coming in super early, and that allowed the mobs to get just kind of grouped up on that corner for Method NA, and then now they are pulling their first reaping into the Golden Serpent here.
So here comes the Golden Serpent for Abrakeydabra as well. Method NA already at 90% on it, does not have that Bloodlust available right now as they look to dodge to and fro from all the green swirlies hitting from those Lost Souls. Certainly don't want to get hit by those. We know they give you that 10% damage debuff for 30 seconds. Huge chunk of damage coming in on Yoda, of course, on the side from that Spit Gold. A lot of damage that comes off. It's really what kind of taxes the healers a lot of the time. That's the struggle and the issue that we saw Plague Method EU with Zalia dying, almost wiping in their King's Restaurant in the previous series. We'll see if Method NA's, the Method counterpart in NA here can overtake that difficulty, as Abrakeydabra has now started on the Golden Serpent as well, and is really not very far behind, only about 4 or 5% compared to Method NA, even though they started quite late.
Yeah, so we actually do see Abrakeydabra kind of catching up single target damage wise, just a little bit more efficient with how they end up using their defensives with the having to move out with that liquid gold dot. It's also important to note how the healers end up pacing their Swiftmen casts and how they end up pre-hotting people, because with this Grievous, the dot ends up hitting you for about 50% of your health-ish unmitigated, so taking 2 of those dots without getting any healing in between actually just puts you in a very scary spot. And we actually do see JB on the side of Method NA doing 30k HPS, while we do see Elsarat just on the side of Abrakeydabra getting a little bit more favorable RNG on the group members, only doing 20k right here.
Master Root finally fading from JB on the side of Method NA, and the animated golds start charging towards, at a very slow pace of course, but charging towards that Golden Serpent, trying to get absorbed. If they do that, of course, the boss will gain a substantial shield and a damage boost to boot, so really just leading to a wipe at that point. Method NA now 43% on the board versus Abrakeydabra 52%, so the gap is starting to widen between the two teams right now as Abrakeydabra dumps their next Spit Gold on the side. Want to make sure to keep all these animated golds together. Mana looking a bit better in favor of Abrakeydabra here, but Method NA is a bit further into the fight as well, so usually the mana pool starts to deplete right around the death of the boss, usually perfectly lining up for teams that have done this.
Yeah, so basically JB electing to run Mass Entangle over Typhoon is pretty interesting in this case. So basically Typhoon will help you later on in the instance with like the Lightning Rod or something else inside of the Gauntlet room. It also helps you reposition mobs a little bit better. We do see Elsarat on the side of Abrakeydabra electing to not end up running Mass Entangle, and he ends up just sitting here. They end up kind of DPSing down the blobs, and they end up spending a lot of their globals or other time that they would elsewise be electing to just hit the Golden Serpent, trying to make sure that they have those animated golds positioned a little bit better. Moving the boss around the room actually just kind of reduces your uptime as well, whereas on the side of Method NA, they have a little bit easier of a time just kind of mass rooting them, keeping those animated golds grouped up, not moving the boss as much, and then you actually do see Method NA getting the boss down to 10%, keeping about the same gap that we did actually see going into the fight, though.
Yeah, this is Abrakeydabra is kind of cornering themselves here, and it could be a bit of a scary situation with these 3 animated golds coming in. They do have access to that Typhoon right now, and the Ring of Peace does go down defensively for the team, wanting to make sure that the boss rest is safe from them. Method NA is just now cleaning up the Golden Serpent, finishing it off. Unfortunately, they did have Yoda's Cheat Death proc just moments prior, so that won't be available for about 6 minutes now. But fortunately, there's not too much residual damage that goes on in this room unless you're unlucky or unfortunate enough to stand in front of the Colossi and get hit by it. But that's just, of course, pure luck and no player movement involved at all. That's a joke, by the way. The Golden Serpent now at 1% health for Abrakeydabra. They did manage to squeeze by. Zelsarat actually got the very last debuff there, and he was pretty taxed on mana, so they dodged a bit of a bullet as they head over to the Gauntlet area, something that Method NA has already started, and they're going to be opting to pull those two constructs in here momentarily.
Yeah, like you said, JB was off screen for a little while. He ended up getting a drink, and while the door was opening, as soon as the door ended up opening, he ended up pulling those Colossus, and they'll be coming in here in a second, making sure that you don't stand in that suppression slam, unlike we did see in the Chinese weekend from, who was it, like Nerf War, Buff Rogue, or a company. It was a company that ended up standing in the suppression slam multiple times and ended up having wipes over that. So making sure that Method NA does in fact dodge that, very good on their side. On the side of Abrakeydabra, you do see those animated guardians coming down the hallway while Abrakeydabra is just a couple seconds away.
That is so menacing looking down that hallway, just seeing these two hulking guardians charge at you, but they don't cast their frontal. You know, part of the issues with why Company got clipped is because they casted that very first frontal out of the room into the room, and the players were not glued up against the wall. But no problem here for the two teams as Method NA hits 32% on the board, looking to proc their second Reaping Wave. Abrakeydabra following suit, just a bit behind, 0 deaths on the team, but this gap is just starting to widen more and more. And you know, we talked about this earlier while Negro was casting on the desk with me, and we had the King's Rest for the previous series titles. It's so hard to make up time in this map. There's not a lot of creativity you can put in it. The pulls are either gated by something like a gauntlet, or there's just not that much trash you can do because it's too dangerous. There's not a lot of packs you can skip, so ultimately it will start to come down to aggression.
And it also comes down to like maybe comfort of the picks as well. Maybe Dr. J, obviously very well known being a mage player. Maybe he might not be as comfortable like doing the most amount of damage possible on this Outlaw Rogue. Well, I don't necessarily believe that's the case because he's been playing Outlaw Rogue for weeks at this point. It could be definitely one of the just things that ends up factoring into why Method NA is just slightly ahead. Overall, I think it ended up coming more so down to how they ended up doing with the Serpent Room, how that Ring of Peace ended up coming out a little bit earlier, keeping the mobs grouped up for nerf inside of Method NA, while even though Divine Field was doing a little bit more damage, just the fact that the mobs were able to just be clumped up, more efficient cleave is very important. On the side of Method NA, they do end up procking their Reaping there, and they end up downing the next Gauntlet mob.
The next Gauntlet mob as they get ready for the final Queen and her Raptor. She deals quite the punch, but fortunately we do know Prot Warriors can now block physical projectiles, something that Prot Warriors are actually notoriously the weakest for on this particular mob, are now one of the strongest for with that shoot from Queen Parla. But Abrakeydabra, 43%, has now finished off mostly their next Reaping Wave and are looking to move on to the same Gauntlet mob as Method NA, who is looking to break out of this Gauntlet as quickly as possible. Queen now down to about 25% health as the Raptor is just frontaling off screen here. None of the players, of course, in front of it does snapshot its direction. Very easy to just sidestep. Abrakeydabra waiting for the final spawn, but Method NA moving on out of here in just a moment.
Yeah, and Method NA ends up doing this room very clean, even though they do not have access to Typhoon. The Typhoon would end up allowing you to do that Lightning Rod on one of those Gauntlet mobs just a little bit more clean, but we ended up seeing just really good use out of Method NA here, even though they do have Mass Entangle. On the side of Abrakeydabra, still dealing with the Queen and her Raptor, while Method NA does shroud past that construct on the bridge.
And into the room here we go. Now, there's a certain level of aggression you can have in the room here. Some teams opted to just do what we actually saw in the previous series. You can either pull all of these ooey gooeys together, then deal with the constructs separately. Some teams just pull everything together, deal with it at once. Of course, much harder, but definitely more time efficient in terms of cleaving everything down. Method NA goes with the former strat, looking to just kill all of the embalming fluids off first, then pull and to desynchronize the cast of the constructs together. After which they will likely proc their third Reaping Wave straight into Machimba. Here comes the first construct just now as the embalming fluids are dying, pulling it over to the other construct and getting ready to cleave these down together whilst getting players out of the entomb.
Yeah, basically it's very important to note that the entomb puts the player in the nearest sarcophagus, so making sure that the players are positioned well enough in order to be able to allow JB to instantly get them out of that sarcophagus is very important. As on the side of Abrakeydabra, they're doing both constructs with all of the embalming fluid.
This is actually really fun to see. In the previous series, we saw Method EU do the exact same pull as Method NA. They dealt with the embalming fluids first, got the constructs after, Beastmaster, whilst 40k is doing exactly what Abrakeydabra is doing. A very aggressive pull of the entirety of the room right now. Certainly more DPS efficient, but much more dangerous, and you have to be on top of those Entomb casts. So you want to make sure you're kiting all of these ooos that die with poison on the floor near those tombs, but it's working out quite brilliantly right now for Abrakeydabra, 59%, and the constructs are not too far off of Method NA, so Abrakeydabra has definitely gained a fair bit of ground here on Method NA, and that put the two teams back neck and neck. 50 seconds, excuse me, on Bloodlust for both teams. So the next thing we're going to have to ask Tettles is which team is going to use their Bloodlust on the trash coming up after Machimba, and which team's going to use it on Machimba, if any.
I don't think either team will end up using it on Machimba just because of when it ends up coming up. We see it coming up in about 35-ish seconds for both teams. Obviously, Method NA here already having pulled Machimba, they would end up having to use Bloodlust at about like 75% of the way through Machimba, which seems like almost a waste, especially whenever you're doing that very deadly double Berserker, double Priest pull after this. Abrakeydabra has additionally pulled Machimba, and they're neck and neck here.
But that's exactly when we see teams use it on Machimba, because that's when it comes up. It might line up with cooldowns, might not. Nonetheless, 10 seconds on the clock here for those Bloodlusts. We'll see what they want to do with them. The double Berserker pull is quite common ground for teams to pull after this boss, with or without Bloodlust. It's really about, do they want to add anything on top of it, like the two Raptors and even the Beastmasters, which, as we saw, differing the two teams before. Bloodlusts are available, have not been popped for either team. They're either waiting for some cooldowns to come up or are indeed saving it for the trash after Machimba. Machimba down to 67% for Abrakeydabra and 68% for Method NA. So Abrakeydabra actually pulling ahead now.
Kind of circling back to that Embalmer double construct pull. So it is Skittish and Grievous, which both don't really affect how many embalming fluids that you can end up pulling together with the constructs. Most of the time you end up seeing that pull be kind of scary just because you do have some adverse affixes, like we've seen Explosive in here, or just some other affixes like that. Additionally, as long as you get those two constructs across the room quick enough for the Entomb, you can actually get your players out of the Entomb quick enough, and you're able to have super efficient cleave on that embalming fluid, and that's what's putting Abrakeydabra even back in the race. They just ended up pulling bigger, and now they are just neck and neck with Method NA here.
Yeah, neck and neck, just trying to maintain that little bit of percentage lead over Method NA. Neither team popping that Bloodlust at this point. They definitely would have committed it with some cooldown. So I think okay, just as I say that Abrakeydabra pops their Bloodlust, cooldowns must be coming up for them, and they're looking to perfectly finish off Machimba by the time that Bloodlust wears off. Method NA, just like their EU counterpart, holding on to it. We'll see exactly what they decide to pull with it for the trash following Machimba, but Machimba really not starting to melt that much faster than Method NA's side with that Bloodlust.
Maybe they're trying to like skip the next Entomb or something like that, because that's the only thing that I can kind of think of as the reason that they're trying to save themselves a little bit of time. Obviously, that would be like a time disparity just between the two teams. Just missing that Entomb would allow you to not have to get off the boss for a second and get the person out of the sarcophagus, but it does seem a little bit trigger happy from the side of Abrakeydabra. I feel like they would have been a little bit better off just kind of holding it, using it for the next pull, but maybe they just don't believe that they need it for the next pull.
I mean, they don't. Divine Field getting crushed there by the tank. I always mention this. Machimba just hits the tank so hard. But anyways, they managed to squeeze out maybe a percent and a half ahead of Method NA with that Bloodlust, but you know, the double Berserker pull, just like you're saying, Tettles, a lot of teams don't use it for, use the Bloodlust for the double Berserker. What they end up using it for is pulling the double Berserker plus the two Raptors and the Beastmaster. So something Method NA has the option to do. We'll see what they do in just a moment here, as Abrakeydabra is now rearing up, has pulled the Berserker, Spell Reflected the two first Hex Priest casts, pulled the second Berserker, no Bloodlust available, and they're looking to cleave just these 5 mobs together, whilst Method NA is actually doing the same pull, so a bit modest from them. They're doing the same pull just with Bloodlust.
Yeah, so we're definitely, it's going to be important to note how quickly Method NA is able to actually down this pack. In addition to that, since they are doing the identical pull, maybe they end up actually wasting some Bloodlust seconds on the side of Method NA just because they believe that they ended up needing it just due to healing because of those physical damage dots on the side of Method NA, whereas Abrakeydabra is like, no, we don't need that. These Frost Shocks and these bleeds don't hit hard enough, and they end up actually doing the pull even without Bloodlust. They do it well, and both teams are still neck and neck here.
Yeah, I mean, they just didn't care. They just swept through the same group, no problem. No one even dipped low. I was, I was excited to see somebody hopefully die or proc a cheat death or something, but no bloodbath here in King's Rest so far between either of these teams, as 0 deaths plagues the board of both teams right now. The Brood has finally joined the Beastmaster pack along with the two Raptors. We do know the Brood patrols the entirety of the bridge ahead of the players right now. Both of the teams will have their 80% reaping proc here on this pack.
Yeah, it's also important to note that the Ground Crush ability, that big circle by the Brute, is kind of annoying, especially in like a triple melee composition. The reason for that being seeing is like you end up not being able to hit like the Beastmaster or any of the other mobs that are inside of the Brute Circle because you do end up having to move out. So you actually can knock that Ground Crush. Obviously, it will recast it instantly, but it does give you a little bit more time. And you actually see Abrakeydabra killing their pack and just pulling ahead a little bit here.
Yeah, starting to pull ahead. Here comes the 4th Reaping Wave right now. They wait for it to join them as they pull the Berserker, Hex Priest, and Witch Doctor combination just ahead of them, cleaving everything down effectively and efficiently together. Now, not a lot of real estate here for the team, so there's a lot of area denial coming out of the Berserker. Of course, we have the Shadow Smashes coming out of the Lost Souls, and there will be the Totem going down. We can see it go down right now from that Witch Doctor that will heal all mobs around it. So you want to make sure to either kill that quickly or move out of it. But with the amount of slows and area denial going out, the better option, of course, is just to kill it as quickly as possible. Abrakeydabra, well dealing with this pack, 88% on the board, dodging the rest of the souls, and it looks like they will stealth ahead and either prepare the pull here with a CC on the mobs or just go straight to the 3rd boss and start up on that.
Oh, okay. So they're actually pulling this pull right before that that area, and it looks like they're doing double Berserkers in this pack. So they end up blinding one of the Berserkers that's right before the council fight, and they ended up doing this pack. I thought they were going to do something similar to what we see on the side of 40k, but they end up just shrouding through, doing this one pull before this entryway, and then on the side of Method NA, they actually do the pull right before the Shadow of Zul opening. So it's just a little bit different in strategy. I don't think it's going to end up being different for count wise because you're going to have to end up killing that Shadow of Zul, and you just need 96%. So both teams I think are going to be okay in that regard. They're just going to Shadow Meld off this Berserker here, and then they're going to make their way to the council fight right here.
So clever from Abrakeydabra. Usually we see a different pattern of crown control coming out of the two teams, so it works quite well for them there. Also interesting to see the shield wall was popped to survive the double bleed from the 2 Berserkers from the side of Divine Field, so a bit of defense lost there, but nothing he will really need as none of these bosses hit too excessively hard. Eyes on the prize here really for the teams is who is going to get the Severing Axe from Kula the Butcher, the very first boss in this council fight. That's really the danger. That's where a lot of the chunking damage comes in the same nature as that Spit Gold debuff from the first boss. So here comes the first Severing Axe. It is on Elsarat, unfortunately. What Elsarat is new with that one right now, but a lot of damage that's going to come in. Remember, these teams don't have battle reses available for anybody else but their healer. So if the healer dies on this, they're either going to wipe or try to reset between the bosses, which you've seen some teams do. But at that point, with how close they are, it's pretty much done for them.
Yep, and we on the side of Method NA, we actually did see that Severing Axe going on to Shakib. He ended up using Dwarf Racial to get it off instantly, so that's actually super good for them. You actually see JB doing able to do a pretty sizable amount of damage by comparison to Elsarat just because he does end up getting that debuff off on him, and Elsarat gets it again.
It's just bad luck. Divine Field cannot get healed out of this 4-stack of Grievous because Elsarat is just taking so much damage, and it's starting to snowball into a 3 and then 4-stack of Grievous. Cannot get himself above 90. Finally does it. Gets the 3rd Severing Axe in a row. Just super unlucky on their part, while one of the axes is on Shakib on the side of Method NA, who has the cushion of cheat death if really needed. So Method NA having a much easier time dealing with this, and now surpassing the percentage of Kula over Abrakeydabra. Divine Field dipping so low, though, just cannot get out of these 4 stacks of Grievous, and they need to finish this boss off as Elsarat gets the 4th Severing Axe in a row now.
Something I didn't notice until now, it looks like one of the Berserkers is paralysis inside the arena, which is actually really bad on the side of Abrakeydabra. It looks like it's going to be okay just because they will end up keeping it CC the whole entire time, but it looked like they failed their Shadow Meld skip there.
Yeah, if that thing breaks out during one of the totem phases on Xenazal, the second boss, the one that they've just spawned right now, it is going to be an absolute disaster. That thing is a nightmare to deal with. Bleeds in all directions, jumping around in area denial, so hopefully they can hold on to that. But Method NA using this opportunity to just keep sneaking further and further away. They've now opened up the gap to almost 10% over Abrakeydabra, and Abrakeydabra first got to the boss.
Yeah, it's also important to note, okay, it looks like the Berserker did end up resetting once the paralysis did end up coming off of it, so that ended up being okay. But like, if they did end up actually activating it, they actually do not need it for count, so that would actually just be so bad on the side of Abrakeydabra, but it ends up being okay. But like you said, Method NA just keeps kind of just pulling away, just slow and steady, methodically turtling and pulling away as they do end up dealing with those totems on the side of Xanzal very quickly.
Yeah, you know, we know only 2 of the totems are really dangerous. The exploding needs to be killed immediately. The earth wall just absorbs so much healing because it constantly pulses and absorbs shield on the boss. Outside of that, especially in all melee group titles, it really doesn't matter. They just need to run around and cleave the remaining ones down. Speaking of which, Method NA now at 13% on the board, about to reach Aka Ali, the 3rd and final boss of this council boss fight. 6% on the board for them. Abrakeydabra at 10%, doing well to dodge the whirling axes. We do know, of course, once you kill one of the council members, they will occasionally reappear on the battlefield with their signature move. Cast it once, once and then disappear. So Zanazal well pulled over to the side of Akali right now as Whirling Axes plague the battlefield. Method and A finishing off the totems using that small bit of downtime before Akali spawns.
Yeah, it's also important to note that both teams did end up getting those totems again. If one was able to actually skip it, it would have actually been a pretty big break point in terms of like how much time you're going to end up saving, because you don't end up having to deal with that Earth Wall totem giving the boss a shield. But Akali coming out for both sides here, obviously doing the debilitating backhand on the tank, which he prays that he ends up parrying. He ends up getting hit by it, and now he has to end up running away as he has his armor broken.
Yeah, just a bit of RNG. I mean, it's just like the axes that Underrot was so unlucky to get 4 in a row of, but if you do manage to dodge or parry, you don't have to do this kiting nature that we see Divine Field doing. Nerf Clap just finished doing the same thing. You just take such immense damage as the tank. Finally, it wears off after 10 seconds, and Barrel Through is immediately cast again, and once again, they hold their breath to see if they will get the next round of debilitating. Nerf Clap indeed does get it, is forced to move away. No damage for him for 10 seconds as he moves over, interrupts Zenizal on his way, and continues to run away from Akali. You know, they actually haven't killed 2 of their totems on the side,
saw that, yeah.
but it really, I guess, is no concern for them. It's nothing but melee and healing over time for the most part from JB as he gets in kitty form and tries to get a bit of extra damage, and they've pulled a fair bit ahead at this point, 20%.
Yeah, saving some damage on the Thundering Totems is actually super nice because it only ends up locking you out, which JB is just sitting in cat form DPSing Akali the whole entire time, so it's not ending up being that big of a deal. We do actually see the difference in damage between JB and Elsrat being pretty minor, but Elsrat is sitting with everybody inside of Grievous right now, trying to make sure that they get top back up as they did just take that barrel through.
Yeah, barrel through goes out, and he did manage, and Divine Field fortunately managed to actually avoid that last debilitating backhand, so a bit of breath of fresh air from Abrakeydabra, but the two teams are just constantly trading the lead throughout this entire map of perfect runs. 0 deaths on the board for either one of them. Abrakeydabra finally downing the third boss and rushing out the door to head over to the Shadow of Azul, something that Method and A is already just about to pull right now. So Method and A a few seconds ahead, 2 minutes left on their Bloodlust. Both teams will definitely have Bloodlust available to them as needed for 60% on the final boss, King Dazar.
Yeah, and we do actually end up seeing the 2 different strategies of how you ended up pulling the bridge, with Trashwise not ending up mattering. They're both sitting at 96%. They're both going to end up proccing their last reaping of the instance on Shadow of Azul, and they're both going to end up pulling it into Dazar. Shadow of Azul is actually pretty scary for your tank by and large, but I don't think on a 19 Tyrannical it should be that bad.
I mean, you just need to babysit the tank. It's not too scary. I mean, it could be a bit scary. Divine Field does not have his One Somebody's Bargain trinket available. We see the debuff present on his player frame right now, so he will die if he gets killed, Tettles. But he will not have that cheat death trinket as a cushion available. Nerf Clap getting just a bit low here as Lighty eats up a bit of damage too, so JB starting to need to split a bunch of healing between the players and make sure Grievous doesn't get too out of hand for them as Shadow of Azul is about to fall at 10%. JB unable to get any damage in as a result, unfortunately, while Elsrat definitely playing a bit more defensive as well, wanting to make sure Divine Field is nice and healthy and he doesn't get into some of the same trouble that JB does. But no problem for JB as he manages to squeeze out of the rest of that. Nerf Clap getting quite low right now with the 4-stack. JB just barely healing him through it as they look to drop off their 100% Reaping Wave and get started on King Dazar. Abrakeydabra finishing off Shadow of Azul, rushing down the stairs in just a moment. They will want to Shadow Meld if they can and vanish their 5th Reaping Wave, and it's all going to come down to Dazar.
Yeah, it looked like the Method in A ended up having to take a couple seconds in order to be able to kill that last Shadow of Azul, and Divine Field actually ends up going down. What happened?
What happened is that the dot component of the shadow damage from Shadow of Azul was not healed by Elsrat on their way down because they were trying to skip the Reaping Wave. So Divine Field slowly ticked down. Nobody was healing him. Grievous started ramping up on top of it. We just mentioned he didn't have his trinket available. I guess Elsrat didn't get the memo. They run in. They have their only and first death of both teams on the map right before the final boss. Something that you just can't have when the runs are so clean and so aggressive from both teams. King Dazar 8% behind for Abrakeydabra at 85% on the board. Method and A looking to further pounce on this opportunity. Clean run from them. They're saving their Bloodlust, getting ready for that 60% break point.
Yeah, it looked like Abrakeydabra was going to be able to make up a couple seconds just because of how Method and A had to end up dealing with the Shadow of Azul, just like keeping everybody in combat, waiting a second to be able to drop it off and get JB a drink. But Abrakeydabra just counter throws with Divine Field dying. They end up using a battle res, which ends up not costing them a ton of time, but it's just time wasted that they could have ended up pulling Dazar there.
Time wasted, and the Rogues are just having a frenzy getting hit by these whirlwinds. We can see the debuff on Yoda, just can't get out of that 4-stack. Jay had it earlier, can't get out of that 4-stack. They're making their healers' lives a living hell right now. So tough for them to heal through as Yoda just does not get out of this funk, but finally Bloodlust up on the side of Method and A as King Dazar mounts Salah, the second Raptor coming out. It will give a bit of fresh air, breath of fresh air to the healers, able to get rid of those final Grievous stacks on the players, but Jay getting clipped here. Procs his cheat death. A bit of extra work for Elsrat right now, who's already so low on mana. He's actually almost already.
Yeah, Elsrat ended up not stopping to drink, as JB actually ended up stopping to drink right before the boss ended up being pulled, because Abrakeydabra did know that they were a little bit behind, and they had to be able to capitalize on Method Dene, taking a second to kill that mob and get the drink. But it looks like Abrakeydabra, Elsrat might end up running out of mana here, which is, if he does end up running out of steam, that would actually just be so bad. But you actually do see the damage differential between the two healers coming into play too. JB is sitting at 8k DPS, while Elsrat's only sitting here at like 5-ish k, which ends up costing them a couple seconds too.
Yeah, I mean, Elsrat's certainly going to come out of mana if Dr. J keeps eating those whirlwinds like a hungry hippo and draining all of his mana in the get-go. He's going to have so much trouble getting out of the Grievous that constantly ramps up on players along with this Quaking Leap as well. So Elsrat has his work cut out for him right now and just doesn't have the mana to deal with it. 36% for Dazar as Method and A starting to creep ahead a percent or two as much as they can over their opponent's Abrakeydabra right now. 0 deaths on the board still for them, but 30% to go.
Yeah, but Abrakeydabra does have 1 death, which that 5 seconds might end up actually coming back into play, because Abrakeydabra here has just like slowly, they're so even with Method in A right here that 1 death that might actually end up coming back to bite them.
That would be
that would be
that would be a
bad.
nightmare.
Oh my lord.
Shield wall being popped here out of Divine Field. King Dazar at 19% on both teams. Abrakeydabra needs to beat King Dazar by 5 seconds over Method and A to try and take this first match. It could be an absolutely grievous error, no pun intended, on the graphics right now. But Whirlwind hitting 2 of their DPS. Elsrat does not have the mana to deal with it. Swagfist is barely staying alive. Dr. J starting to ramp up on the Grievous right now as well. Ashine barely staying alive too. I don't know if they can hold out till the end of the match. Dr. J goes down now. Battle Rest comes up. Swagfist 1% about to get rezzed as well. Actually, he won't have the rest. They don't have it available. Manages to hang on, and Ashine procs his cheat death as well. Method and A takes the first game, and I mean, that was just Tettles. That was a slop fest at the end from Abrakeydabra.
Really surprising to start seeing that as well, because it went so solid overall for both teams when we went through this. It was coming down to the wire. They were having really good pulls, and at that point, Sours, they just really made their lives really horrible for the healers at the very end.
That was brutal. I hate to be a healer. I know that you've probably experienced this a lot, Jack, where DPS just aren't doing a good job standing in bad things, standing in tornadoes, and then just really bad RNG on the healer side where if the healer gets hit a lot, then you're losing DPS. And sure, the DPS gains some DPS not using defensives, but most of the time you don't. And so it was just a really clean dungeon overall by both teams up until the very, very end there, unfortunately, where Method and A was ahead by 23 seconds on the first boss, looking really good. And then Abrakeydabra kind of inked it out a little bit. They used Bloodlust on Machimba here, but they'd only put them in the head by 4 seconds on boss kill time, which isn't really much anything at all. And then Method and A somehow made up a full 22 seconds on the third boss, even though they were behind at the start. And then Abrakeydabra just kind of fell apart at the very end of the dungeon, where Method and A was able to keep it together and get a win when it needed it the most. I predicted that Method and A was going to win this, and then I was like, okay, my prediction's wrong. Abra is going to win this dungeon, and then Abra proved me wrong and proved my prediction right.
You know, he mentions what it's like for the healer with the DPS standing in bad, especially with the Grievous ramping up, but I know what it's like as a tank when your healer doesn't heal you and you flop over. Dang, dude, that death on Divine Field was just like unacceptable. No, I mean, he was just running, he was sitting by himself. I can't believe that. I'm kind of glad that, in a way, I know it sounds sadistic, but I'm glad in a way that what ultimately cost them the match was the slot play at the end, because they would have kicked themselves so hard if they lost by a 5-second death timer to not healing the tank who had a residual dot from above that was already dead.
Without a doubt. But we also got to look at the good side of the Elsrat pull, because after getting 4 different debuffs on Kula, the Butcher, he was able to heal through that. That was just extremely unlikely that it would even happen, but extremely unlikely that he'd even live through that one, Sours.
Yeah, it's just really bad luck. There's no like bad luck protection on getting the debuff. So you see Elsrat's got the Severing Axe debuff on him. It finally goes off, and as soon as the debuff goes off, the boss casts it again, and the boss is at 11%, so he's got another 20 seconds of Severing Axe on him. But luckily, the Kula's going to actually end up dying a little bit, and you can see Elsrat in the middle of your screen. You see right as Kula dies, he's going to run off for a little bit, and then if you look right here, you'll see that now he's actually invisible, and he no longer has the Severing Axe debuff. So with the power of Shadow Meld, he was able to just remove that without using any additional mana. And so if you play a Night Elf, and you can Shadow Meld drop combat between those bosses like we talked about, that's how you can see, like, with your own eyes, oh, that's very clearly the Shadow Meld interaction with this 20-second debuff to get it off of you and to save you so much mana and such a dangerous debuff for the fight.
Yeah, it was very fortunate that they were able to do that to begin with. You know, first we saw a lot of times DPS doing that just to be able to get their potions back off cooldown and be able to use that again during boss fights. And then when you find that once combat ends with those bosses, you do drop your debuff. So it's extremely helpful as a healer to be able to get rid of that, because after getting 4 in a row, he ended up getting 10% mana going into, I believe it was Zanazal, the second boss of the council there. So it was huge that they were able to drop that and be able to get rid of it. But as we're looking at game 2, Sloot, we're going to be going into the Underrot. We haven't really seen too much of that today.
No, we haven't. And there's, we talk about a lot of the common themes. This dungeon is very front-loaded in terms of danger. The first 2 bosses are probably the most dangerous. A lot of the trash that you need to babysit in Kragmaw's room. We have the Blood Matrons. There's just a ton of craziness going on in this dungeon. We know Method NA specifically has had some issues in Kragmaw's room. We've had JB have a couple of hiccup deaths in there occasionally, so hopefully they've cleaned that up. Curious to see what comes out of the 2 teams. I think it'll be a really good matchup, but I mean, this can sneak away from them pretty easily, and it happens very early in the dungeon that a lot of the things are determined just because there's a very aggressive pull that comes in.
Yeah, they've had some like not only JB deaths, Shakib deaths as well, where they had Shakib died in the second room, Shakib died on the third boss, and then JB's died on the last boss. So Method NA has definitely had some struggles in Underrot. Kind of why I predicted that this could go Abra's way in this, because they've got to fix all those errors, and I think Abra does have what it takes to play this dungeon cleanly without this kind of same mistakes we saw from them in the last dungeon.
And they're going to need to be able to step it up to be able to stay alive in this series. So don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be back with game 2 between Mythic NA and Abrakeydabra. Method NA is up 1-0 over Abrakeydabra as we're moving on into game 2 on Underrot. Dealing with Tyrannical, Bursting, and Explosive. This one, Sours, looks to be very dangerous, and on Method EU really hasn't been too solid on historically.
No, yeah, Method EU nor Method NA have been very solid on this map, and like it's just been such a rough dungeon for these guys, unfortunately, where Underrot's a pretty nasty dungeon. I mean, it's slimy, it's covered in goop everywhere, there's ooey gooeys, and there's bats. It's gross, and it's been a pretty gross play from Method NA here as well in the past.
Yeah, and especially as you guys mentioned before the break, the second boss's room has been such a pain for so many teams because it pushes you so hard to be very aggressive, try to get as many mobs in together as possible here, Tettles, and so many times, because there's such a wide diversity of mobs and the different abilities you have to be able to shut down constantly, it's been a huge trap a lot of times.
Dude, the Sphere of Bloodswarmers are actually brutal. And we actually did see somebody, they were overpulling Learn to Fly. I think it was Learn to Fly. They ended up overpulling Kragmaw's room and ended up wiping to it earlier on in the day. It's just, you just need to know how much you're actually able to pull whenever you do enter Kragmaw's room.
I'm also moderately surprised just looking at the team comps there. I know it's the same meta and it's mirror matches, but I'm actually moderately surprised no Unholy DK being busted out for either team, especially with Waycrest Manor looming as the third map. So I guess they just felt comfortable with their pick. But we have seen kind of Shakib not playing the Unholy DK as much as he did in that first week. Not sure if it's a comfort pick or just something that works better to the strategy.
A number of times we've seen different racial changes and stuff take precedent over actually going into some of the class changes, so it might just be what their mind is at and thinking they'll be a little bit more comfortable in that spot rather than going after another class that, like you said, would be really good for Waycrest Manor. We'll have to see if it pays off as we go into game 2 in just a moment here on this one, Sours.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's up to the DPS, I think, a lot in this dungeon, as well as the healer play is pretty important. But I think the most important thing when we talk about bursting is not rolling bursting stacks. And when you're doing big aggressive pulls, you could easily roll bursting stacks throughout the second room, and even through the first room, it's really dangerous. And I know we even saw Learn to Fly, somebody got hit by the cleave from one of the first mobs earlier, but they didn't die to the bleed, right? So there's a lot of just points in this dungeon where you can feel safe, and then if you let your guard down for a second, you'll be dead.
And they'll have to watch out for that. A lot of deaths, especially on that first pull that many teams are going after in the Underrot. But let's take it into game 2 between Method NA and Abrakeydabra.
You know, Tettles, I was kind of wondering why Jack was pointing at me when he said that bursting stacks were rolling, but I realized he was actually pointing through me towards the DPS.
Wait a second, hold on, wait a
usually
second.
likes to roll bursting stacks.
You got him.
Certainly quite, I knew it, Jack. I got you, buddy. So, you know, certainly a lot of the danger from bursting in this dungeon lies in the big pulls in the second room with Kragmaw, and just the DPS having the kind of just making sure that they don't roll these stacks. It could get out of hand. Neither team popping their Bloodlust nonetheless. At the beginning of the dungeon here, we saw a bit of damage coming in on Yoda as the cleave comes in on him as well. Lighty gets cleave from the Savage Cleave from the Matron, something that Saurus had just mentioned prior. One death on the board already for Method and A right now, this first brutal pull.
Yeah, prior to this too, we were all a little bit talking a little bit off broadcast about pulling ticks into this first pack, and we all agreed that was a pretty bad idea. We actually do see Method and A end up pulling ticks, getting all their bursting stacks onto the whole entire group. The ticks actually double burst is what we called it. They end up exploding whenever they do get killed, so it actually put everybody incredibly low, but Lighty ended up getting cleaved and going down there.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to see that. And I'm pretty sure Yoda got cleaved as well. He might still be playing Dwarf because I don't think the entirety of the bleed actually followed through. So he had a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card with that. But one death on the board, and with how close the last map was between these two teams, it could be absolutely detrimental to the group. Really big pull coming in here for Abrakeydabra. They managed to stabilize and interrupt the Blood Priest. Don't want the Dark Reconstitution being cast. It will max heal somebody, one of the mobs, to the max HP.
We actually saw that on the Befouled Spirit. The Befouled Spirit was like so low, and then it got instantly topped. I think it might have been through the Reconstitution, as Lighty actually does end up going down. Nerf ends up going down, and it looks like it might be a full wipe on the side of Method and A.
Full wipe coming in early in the dungeon for Method and A. Nerf Clap, of course, did have the trinket available, but it just wasn't enough to get through the amount of damage, plus the bursting as the mobs were dying. Full 5-man wipe here on top of the first death from Lighty. 30 seconds worth of death on the board for Method and A. Already find themselves on the back foot here compared to Abrakeydabra, who has pulled their first Reaping on top of Elderly Axa, doing well to interrupt those Blood Bolts. Bloodlust has been pulled on top of it too.
Yeah, making sure that you actually do Spell Reflect or interrupt those Blood Bolts is very, very important, as the Blood Bolts, whenever they do get Spell Reflected, they do a pretty sizable amount of damage, not only to Elderly Axa, but to the Blood Effigy as well. We actually do see Dr. J go down on the side of Abrakeydabra, but a Battle Res is coming through.
I would have thought this was Raid, but apparently it's not. Abrakeydabra now working for their last, working with no Battle Reses as they get the last of their Bloodlust off the chart right now. Method and A moving down, doing the same pull as their first round of Reaping comes in. They're very vulnerable right now. They don't have the tank trinket available for Nerf Clap. Both of the rogues have procced their cheat death, so any cast or any accidental getting hit by the green swirlies from the Lost Souls, or getting hit by one of the Shadow Smashes, that area denial, we can see one right now on the screen, could be absolutely detrimental to the group. They do have their Battle Res available, which is, I guess, the one saving grace of that wipe. It was a full team wipe. They didn't try to salvage it with a Battle Res, so they do have it available if things start to go south for them. But Abrakeydabra 20% on the board here as they work to kill their second Blood Effigy. Elderly Axa 18%.
Yeah, that mask just ended up lasting so long on the side of Method and A, and then we saw people start ending up bleeding out. Abrakeydabra here ends up killing that Soul Effigy. It looked like it was with a Spell Reflect, and now Elderly Axa sitting at 11 or 10% for them, while on Method and A side 34%, as they did end up having to take a lot of time in order to be able to recoup here.
Yeah, recoup, but Abrakeydabra managed to squeeze by. Jay did die. They used the Battle Res, but fortunately they were able to finish off the Reaping and Elderly Axa. We see the Mass Res, the Mass Stealth, come up as they head straight for Kragma's room, commonly skipping those ticks as we discussed. Titles, nobody wants to deal with those during bursting weeks, as well as the extra damage that they splash onto the group. Tyrannical or not, does not matter. Pretty substantial pull coming in here as they deal with how many Feral Bloods? So there's actually two Blood Swarmers in here, so quite dangerous. Need to make sure you interrupt those Sonic Screeches, heal up the targeted victims of their focus, Swagfist being one of them, Segfist being both of them actually right now. So a lot of damage coming in on him as he starts to kite away a bit. They help with peel and crowd control on the rest of the group, making sure to interrupt, of course, the Lashers. Any Maggots that find their way into the group also need to be hard CC'd when they cast their frontal.
Yep, and in comes Ring of Peace for Swagfist there in order to be able to get those Blood Swarmers off him, not mailing him for a sizable amount of shadow damage, as we do see the Mass Stealth coming in for the side of Method and A as well, as they do a pretty big pull, similar to Abrakeydabra size inside of this Kragma room here. Just making sure that they do get kicks, like you said, on those Blood Swarmers for the Sonic Screech, and then just making sure that those Disease Lashers do also get kicked on their cast is very important, as we do actually see the Sonic Screech go out for Method and A.
Yeah, it does go out, and they do have to babysit a lot of these explosives coming in. Definitely one of the detrimental affixes that kind of turns you off of pulling too much in this room. Abrakeydabra doesn't care, though, as they pull most of the remainder of the room. They'll have one pull combined after this that they need to deal with. One of the Maggots is in there, does manage to get interrupted, stunned before it gets his cast off. Therefore, it will have a bit of safe time and downtime before dealing with it. Feral Bloodswarmer, always marked for the teams. #1 target for everybody, wanting to make sure you kill it. Not only does it fixate another target, and the tank can't really do much about it, but it does pure shadow damage. So a lot of damage that comes in. Bursting stacks plaguing Method and A as they run over to the next pack right now, and hopefully they can get the rest of this pool cleanly done, because we do know, as Sours mentioned, this is a room that's given Method and A definitely some trouble in the past few weeks.
Yeah, that maggot or that that maggot does have a biocast, or slug as it's known by Sours. Ends up having a biocast, which ends up needing to be CC'd. Most of the time you end up using like gouge, paralysis, or a stun on it. because that bile ends up having like a frontal cone, and it will end up picking off people if you're not actually paying attention. Whenever you do have this many mobs, it can actually get kind of easy for you to just kind of look at something else or look at Bloodswarm or Kiting or something like that and not getting a stun out on that maggot. So making sure that you do actually get it CC'd whenever that cast is coming through is very important. As actually Dr. J doing infinite DPS here. Just kidding, it's only 90k.
Both teams looking to proc, of course, their third reaping before engaging with Kragmaw, but more trouble plagues Method and A in this room as Nerf Clap does go down. Battle Res is still available from the beginning of the dungeon when they had the first disaster, but even with that Battle Res on the tank, he does not have threat on all these mobs, and unfortunately, Lighty finally goes down and succumbs to the damage. Shakib is next in line, just getting so many of those reaping stacks. Explosives going off in the back, finishing Shakib off, and Nerf Clap goes down again. Yoda follows suit, and JB is last to go down as another full team wipe, +1 death because they battle res the tank, plagues Method and A, and the nightmares return from the Kragmaw room, and they will have to run all the way back now and just get themselves in form. Abrakeydabra looking nice and sharp, looking to proc their third reaping here and drag it into Kragmaw probably.
Yep, Kragmaw looking very menacing out in the middle of the instance there for Method and A. Getting a lot of NA lulls in the chat as Method and A does have another full wipe. So Abrakeydabra here just pulling these reanimated Guardians and positioning here in order to be able to pull Reaping into Kragmaw right here.
Yeah, Kragmaw is pulled with all the Reaping. Now, you know, we mentioned it a few times. Of course, one of the benefits of this all melee group is they don't really have to be exactly up against the wall with the charge. The melee can stomp these ticks out as they move over to Kragmaw quite safely, so no problem for them. And they're using a lot of these Reaping Souls to just cleave effectively off of the boss. No danger there as long as Divine Field gets that Dispel. But most important really is going to be the Tantrum, which not only spawns the ticks that all of his other abilities do as well, but just huge amounts of pulsing physical damage on the group, whilst the group has to be spread out in order to stomp the ticks.
Yeah, so there isn't like a quaking or something like that that could end up allowing somebody to end up going down during the Tantrum, as we've seen in weeks previous, but there is explosive, and the DPS aren't really chasing around Kragmaw, but if an explosive actually does spawn off of Kragmaw very far on the far side of the room, we could actually see some issues with being able to kill it very quickly, as rogues are most of the time the people who end up killing the explosives the best, just because of like how pistol shot ends up working. But we actually do not see an explosive spawn, and they are back DPS in Kragmaw. Tantrum being not exactly the most melee friendly ability in this melee heavy composition though, so making sure that you get as few tantrums as possible is very important as well.
Yeah, but Tantrum really, to be fair, is not friendly for anybody, even the range, because the range need to run around and stop takes and maybe even off heal a bit. It's a lot of dangerous damage. They're likely going to have to deal with at least 2 more Tantrums based on Kragmaw's health. We are in a tyrannical setting. The bosses do have more health. Method and A looking to recoup and get back right now as Nerf Clap's taking an immense amount of damage with the Guardians that have been pulled in from the side. Method and A looking to proc their third Reaping as well and drag it into this menacing Kragmaw boss encounter that they started with. A lot of damage coming in on the group in the form of the bursting for Method and A, finishing off the last couple of Guardians and proccing their Reaping in a moment as Abrakeydabra now starts on their second Tantrum.
Yep, and Elsrat actually positions in the middle of the room, casting his Tranquility in order to be able to allow it to hit all the members of the group, so that's actually really good positioning by him. And we actually have we are seeing him also do about 9-ish K DPS, which on a Kragmaw is actually pretty good. I mean, he's healing a little bit more than he maybe needs to, but during the Tantrums and just keeping up his dots and stuff like that, he's actually been doing a good job, especially week to week, as we have been critical of how much DPS Elsrat has been doing in weeks past.
And you know, he has really cranked it up on the offensive scale right now. It's working quite well here for him. 25% on Kragmaw. They probably will get one more Tantrum at the end, depending on how low they get the boss. They can just kind of commit, as we call it on live servers, just commit to killing the boss really. But it seems it's too high for their comfort as we see the players running around, stomping these ticks. We do know how out of hand the ticks can get. Not only the tick damage in terms of stacking damage over time on the tank and explosions on the group if you do choose to kill them, but also with the explosive affix. If you have a huge amount of mobs on top of the boss, you're going to spend so much time just needing to cleave or kill off the explosives that are spawning. Method and A down but not out, as they are now at 68% on Kragmaw, 60% trash, similar to Abrakeydabra 61, but they have a large amount of deaths to overcome by the end of the dungeon.
Yeah, so having about 55 seconds in depth differential between the two teams is actually so bad. In addition to that, 60% of Kragmaw's health, that's probably like another minute, maybe 2-ish minutes differentiating the team. So you would actually need to see a major mistake here from Abrakeydabra, which actually could end up happening just because of where the checkpoints in this instance end up being. If they did end up, if Abrakeydabra did end up wiping at this point in the instance, they would have to run back very, very far just because of the checkpoint does put you at the very beginning of the instance in Underrot here.
Abrakeydabra dealing with of the first hazard spaghetti of the dungeon right now as they pull the Guardians on top of it, making sure to effectively spawn the explosives nearby. Now, we do know, of course, that these no probes are immobile. They are rooted in place. Important to pull the mobs on top of them rather than keeping everything separated and having to deal with explosives far away from this all melee comp. But a rather aggressive pull coming in here. Once they delete that horror, the Guardians on top of the Spirit Caller and, of course, on top of the Defiler now. So I believe they actually have 2 Death Speakers in there because there's one patrolling with the Defiler plus the original one in the Guardian group. Divine Field taking an immense amount of damage, gets dispelled by Elsarat, but they reapply the dot right away as there are 2 of these Death Speakers. He doesn't care though, pops Shield Wall and just heads over to the second no probe as they cleave everything down, trying to manage the bursting as well as they can, but there's 5 stacks on the board and they finally manage to stabilize with only this grotesque horror on the map that really does nothing if you keep interrupting its Death Bolt.
Man, we thought JB had hair in his chest. Divine Field proving that he has the hairier chest here, manning up with that pull, pulling that straight into the nope rope, popping a shield wall, and they're looking to pull these 2 Defilers into Spore Caller Zancha, proccing their 4th Reaping of the Instance, which will eventually trickle in on top of this boss as well.
Yeah, so they effective cleave here. As long as they keep those Defilers locked down, you need 2 interrupts per to make sure you interrupt that Shadow Bolt volley and, of course, that Wither and Curse. Don't care about the Spirit Totem. Just move away from it. Just a bit of area denial will kill you, of course, if you stand near it, but you have plenty of time to get away from it. Method and A finally about to down Krogmaw here. 3% on the board for them, and they'll be moving on to do similar pulls that we just saw.
Yeah, something to note about these Defilers and their totem, though, is that it doesn't allow your tank to actually get Shockwave where he wants it positioned a lot of the time, and that ends up having to force your rogues in order to be able to like cloak and end up soaking a bunch of these mushrooms, because you do get upheavals and some of the frontal abilities, which ends up clearing the mushrooms, but a lot of them are not getting cleared, and you actually do see Dr. J and Ashan end up popping their cloak there, ending up getting all of those, as we do see the Reaping coming in onto Spore Caller Zancha as well.
Yeah, I mean, those rogues just eating so many mushrooms in game. Of course, you don't want to be doing that kind of stuff. Dr. J now getting one of the Shadow Smashes on top of him and proccing the cheat death, something that they're going to need later. Well, actually, it might be up by the time they get to Unbound A-Bomb, but there's a lot of healing that goes on that Tyrannical boss. Very, very dangerous right now. So Dr. J will have 20% reduced max health for that 1 minute as Method and A looks to finally cleave the rest of the Guardians chasing the group right now, move over to their own grotesque horror, cleave that down. It looks like Method and A is pretty much doing the exact same pull pattern as we just saw from Abrakeydabra, but of course they're a fair bit behind.
Yeah, it's just all those deaths, honestly. Them wiping and then just having this 55 seconds of death differential in addition to that is just putting them so far behind, even though they may be a little bit close in the instance. Obviously, they're about 50% on Spore Caller Zancha behind. It's going to put them even further behind than they may seem just because of how big the death differential is here.
Yeah, I mean, it'll put them a bit behind. Divine Field doing well to move away from Spore Caller Zancha, of course, during that Festering Harvest cast. He does still melee the tank during that, so the explosion plus the melee can deal with a fair bit of damage that you don't want to do. Divine Field well positioning himself between all of the mushrooms here to make sure that he cleaves as many as he can with that frontal shockwave from Spore Caller Zancha. One of the 2 mechanics that eliminate mushrooms outside of players kind of face eating them and face tanking them like the rogues did there to pre-clear before the Festering Harvest. The other one, of course, is this upheaval with these glowing orange-red arrows on the players.
Yeah, I actually think that the Defilers on the side of Method and A end up getting their Withering Curse off for 1 tick, reducing the player's damage, so that's not really what you want to see. You want to make sure that you do get that and the Shadow Bolt volley kicked instantly every single time by rotating 2 melee kicks in between both of those mobs. Obviously, they are running a 3 melee DPS and 1 tank comp, so they do have enough kicks available, but they ended up having one of those ticks of that Withering, of that curse end up going off as they do proc Reaping into Spore Caller Zancha here.
Definitely good that they're deciding to use a tank in their comp on these dungeons right now. Method and A70.
Hey, you never know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we did see the 4 DPS in previous MDIs. You never know if something like that'll make a return in the future, but that's not the reality we live in here, as Abrakeydabra is at 4% on Spore Caller Zancha, about to finish off this boss, after which they will either stealth or pull the Faceless Corruptor as well along with them towards the last and final group of the not the Guardians, excuse me, the Death Speaker group that they will pull together, yes, along with the Guardians and, of course, the Defiler. The Defiler is the one that I was forgetting the name of. But they also pull the Grotesque Horror, something that we didn't see the other teams do, which will kind of allow them to skip the final no probe at the end with the 2 Faceless Corruptors rather than dragging it over, Tettles.
I don't know how I actually feel about that. So I understand why they end up doing it, because you don't get super efficient cleave whenever you are doing two Faceless Corruptors on top of that Nope Rope, Hazard Spaghetti, whatever, that Danger Noodle that you end up calling it. But at the same time, it's so scary for that pack just because of how many kicks you do end up having, and making sure that you do micromanage those kicks on all of those casts is very important. Whereas in the Faceless Corruptor pack, you only have the Nope Rope cast to kick there.
It looks like they actually needed it anyways. They needed 2 more Nope Ropes, so instead of dragging both Faceless Corruptors to the first one and then the other one closer up the hill to where the final Faceless Corruptor patrols, and they didn't want to have the risk of, accidentally pulling it or proxy aggroing it, so they're just dealing with it here as we see a punt come back for the team right now, making sure that you move away from these maddening gazes. It will do a ton of damage to you if you're in a random direction. Working, of course, first to kill that Hazard Spaghetti and make sure that they don't have to not only stay rooted in this place because it won't move, but also babysit its Death Bolt cast. Don't want any of those leaking through, especially with all the frontals and tentacles wildly slapping around in the distance.
Yeah, that's the reason that this pull is actually most of the time is super scary, because you have to have people in melee range of that Hazard Spaghetti in order to be able to kick it, while the Faceless Corruptors end up spawning those tentacles, and of course you have to end up moving away from the tentacles because they'll end up one-hitting you if you stand too close to them for too long, because they'll end up lashing out towards you. And you do see Abrakeydabra getting 100%, proccing their last Reaping of the Instance, and they are on their way to Unbound Abomination with their Bloodlust available.
Method and A moving down here after killing Sporecaller Zoncha. Had not pulled that Faceless Corruptor as the 5th Reaping Wave comes in for Abrakeydabra. They port right downstairs and get ready to pull the Unbound Abomination for the last boss of the dungeon. Typically, just as we see with all the other teams, Bloodlust is ready. Everything is combined together and cleaved down, as Method and A has done the similarly large pull upstairs with the Guardians, Death Speaker, Defiler, and there's a Faceless Corruptor in there, so they're going to have to be very careful to dodge a lot of those tentacles.
And we actually do see Unbound Abomination's health not moving. The reason for this being is that he does, his energy ends up moving, and whenever his energy does hit 100, he does end up spawning 2 adds, and whenever you do kill those adds, then it will do 33% of his health per 2 adds that you do end up killing. So making sure that you're actually DPSing down Unbound Abomination, even though his health doesn't look like it's moving on the screen, is very important here. On the side of Method and A, it looks like they're all getting so low, and JB does end up actually able to heal them through that Grievous, or the bursting that they ended up getting there.
At some point, I unfortunately didn't catch it, but they did manage to squeeze in 1 more death. They are now at 13 instead of 12, so they do have a full minute behind in terms of deaths on here. So the only way Abrakeydabra is losing this is, of course, just a full team wipe at this point. Even if they had to 4-man the rest of this boss, I'm pretty sure they could still win the rest of this map. But they still have to do well on this boss. I mean, it is a tyrannical setting. There's a lot of residual damage going out in the form of the damage over time component that accrues slowly over the course of the fight. You can see the players right now at 3 stacks apiece. That, of course, is cleaned with this aura from the players that we see here. But I mean, just a lot of battle between the two teams back and forth here, Tettles.
Was this actually a lot of battle, though? Because to me, it seemed like Method and A was...
I mean, you didn't let me finish my sentence.
Oh, sorry.
Can I finish?
Yes.
Okay, I'm done. No, but what I was going to say is really just between this and King's Rest as well, right? I mean, it was just back and forth. The Abrakeydabra really kind of threw it to Method and A. Just wasn't enough for them. More deaths coming out on Method and A's side. At this point, it's the Method and A that we've seen it happen before. They're able to recompose themselves, and we'll have the game 3 come out of this. It's going to be really close between the two teams, but I mean, Abrakeydabra had the choke at the end of King's Rest. Method and A certainly had a lot more issue in this dungeon compared to the King's Rest performance from Abrakeydabra.
Yep, and we did see those Visages end up getting killed on the side of Abrakeydabra there. They only need 2 more, and then they will end up being able to finish off this Unbound Abomination. And in the instance, we actually did see Shakib going down on the side of Method and A. He gets rezzed up. They do proc their last Reaping of the Instance, and they are on to Unbound Abomination, but too little, too late here.
Yeah, it's just not going to work out for them, as Abrakeydabra, of course, just moves around in the circular pattern around the room, wanting to make sure that you kite away from those spores and always have somewhere to go whilst pointing the frontal from the boss, of course not in the direction that they're going. A lot of damage coming in here from the spores should they hit the players, but there's a lot of T-clap action, thunderclap action from the Warriors, proccing a lot of those free victory rushes, getting free healing, 20% of max health every time he does that, so just able to sustain himself for a fair amount of time while Ulcerat focuses on the group and perhaps even a bit of damage.
Yep, and the last 2 Blood Visages spawn on the side of Abrakeydabra. You do see Titan Keeper Herzl shooting his death laser at them and killing them right there.
Is that what that is?
I don't know. It is now.
You gotta watch out for that death laser there, as Abrakeydabra takes game 2 and pushes us into game 3, which is going to be on a Waycrest Manor. A pretty interesting fact that we were talking about behind the desk as you guys were cast to the game. This is the 9th series out of 13 that we've seen Method NA play that have gone to a game 3. whether it's game one, most of the time it's been their game twos that they kind of just falter on or kind of have some simple mistakes or something like that, but they keep on going to these game threes, Sours, and most of the time they seem to be pretty well composed on them.
Yeah, they've played, I think, the most matches out of any team, period. We're talking about this, where they almost always go to game 3. They almost always lose. And I almost felt kind of like a prophet predicting these wipes that they ended up happening in this dungeon, where it's like, okay, well, they often wipe here in the second room. And as you can see, they don't have a battle res that Nerf had just out a few seconds ago. And then Lighty goes down. There's explosives everywhere. There's these living rots. They can't handle this. Nerf goes down again. And then this is a huge, unfortunate wipe in this room. And it's not the first time, unfortunately, that Method NA has wiped in this room. And then we get on to our third boss. And it's like, all right, she keeps died on this boss in the past. And there he goes again, unfortunately. It was just a series of unfortunate events for Method NA in this dungeon, whereas Abrakeydabra was able to do this relatively flawlessly, only 1 death on the board for the whole dungeon. Really well played by them.
Very impressive performance that Abra did have. And a big thank you to the StarCraft community and big welcome to you guys who are now joining us from that host. We're just diving into one of the series in the upper finals, the Mythic Dungeon International. And let's take a look at that other wipe we were talking about, Sours, that from the beginning just set the pace for the rest of the game for them.
Yeah, this is a wipe that we haven't really seen before. Not many people actually end up pulling this mask, and they're just they decided to pull the Dark Omen mask, and it doesn't look very good here. And then you see there's a little explosive orb in the distance, and then it goes off. And we can't let orbs go off. There's just way too much damage here. Like things are looking pretty good. All of a sudden, everyone's really low, and then orbs and damage, and like look, Yoda's got a dot on him, and then orb explodes. The Nerf goes down again, and then Dark Reconstructions are getting off. You see a mob healed to full health. When this wipe happened, it was basically over, but they trucked on anyway, and then they wiped again, and then it was really over after that.
And it wasn't even really in the distance; it was just right in there with everybody else. Of course, the explosive orbs got to make sure they're dying, or else the damage is going to be very high as they do detonate onto the entire group. And this isn't the first time we've seen Method NA not hitting explosive orbs, missing out on them, causing those wipes. We saw early on with a Taldazar, I believe, week 1 as well. That was just their downfall from there. So we are going to be taking a quick break before we move on to Game 3 on Waycrest Manor. Don't go anywhere. Game 3 coming up right after this. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International as we're moving on into Game 3 between Abrakeydabra and Method NA. Waycrest Manor is going to be that final map in the series to determine who moves on into the upper finals and who goes into the lower bracket. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk, we've got Sloot, Tettles, and Sours. And as we look at Waycrest Manor, we also have to look at the time trials that we had to do. In order to qualify for cup play, they had to be able to complete the time trials first in Sours. This one has been very strong for Abrakeydabra, but we just saw Method NA play not too long ago in cup.
That's right, Jack. So Method NA did this dungeon earlier, and they did a route similar to the route that Method EU ended up using when they were on broadcast. And then Method EU used that route to very great success earlier today, showing just how fast it was. And then when Method NA came through and did this dungeon earlier today, they ended up slowing down the route a little bit because they didn't have to go as aggressive as Method EU did, because the team they were going against, Games Revolted, had some significant wipes in this dungeon, unfortunately, that didn't require them to go as hard as they might need to. So if both teams end up trying to use this super aggressive, very fast route in this dungeon, then we could see some really crazy head-to-head gameplay here in Waycrest Manor.
I think that's the most significant thing to really talk about is we saw them keep, the stops. They didn't pull all the stops out in order to win because they knew that they had it well in hand if they didn't. So Double Unholy DK coming out on both sides in this one. Tettles looks like they're going to be ready to be able to have some very aggressive pulls.
Yeah, not too surprising here, just because it is that Raging Grievous affix. You were able to actually just pull so big in Waycrest Manor with that Raging Grievous, Rawls Room, how you end up doing Heartsbane Triad, just that kind of stuff.
And we'll be looking at it as we see who is going to be taking this Game 3 between Method NA and Abrakeydabra in Waycrest Manor.
And here we go. I mean, I'm curious to see right now out of Method NA if they truly did end up holding back on some of the pulls that we saw Method EU do. If they did, this is the match that they need to start busting that out for, because Abrakeydabra will be relentless about this. They will want this match so hard to stay in that upper bracket and not get pushed to lower again. Yeah,
but it was super high risk, high reward on the side of Method NA. The stuff that we predicted that they were skipping out on is pulling Lord and Lady Waycrest with all of the trash, which is a very dangerous tank pull, as we do see mirrored pulls here on the side of Method NA and Abrakeydabra as they do do pull the Acolyte and all the Toads into Heartsbane Triad here.
And both of them on either side. Shakib is the one that gets mind-controlled by the first phase of Sister Selena. Group DPSs him down below 60%, starting on Malady here and moving on to Briar in just a moment, as both teams looking to complete their first phase and then recycle the Witches sub 50% and finish them off before they get the Dire Ritual cast at 100 energy. Really shouldn't be much of a concern for these teams, especially in a fortified environment. Most of the danger that's going to come in this dungeon is the trash.
Yeah, we actually do see Shakib on the side of Method NA spiking up to 65k DPS, while we do see a Shine on the side of Abrakeydabra sitting a little bit lower at about 47k. He ended up probably not using all of his cooldowns like on pull there, and he ended up kind of trying to pace them, allow those Acolytes to kind of sit higher health for a little bit longer periods of time and get a little bit more efficient cleave. But it's just ending up being a little bit slower on the bosses as we do see Selena go down on the side of Method NA, but Abrakeydabra is still working on that boss.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra is still working on it, and Elstrad's having a bit of struggle getting out of these Grievous stacks. Just finally manages to do it now that they get to the second wave of Sister Malady here, but just between the Jagged Nettles and a lot of the damage coming in from Briar, there's just a lot of healing needed, and it started to snowball into the Grievous effect that where, of course, in the dungeon, once you hit that 90% threshold, you'll start accruing that increasing damage over time unless you're healed back above that 90%. But nonetheless, we do have the first kill on the Triad here as Method NA rushes out the door and starts to pull these captains back into the hall, which we know, along with those first horrors. A lot of damage from this trash. Very dangerous for the tank here, not to mention the raging effect that's going to hit them at 30%.
Yeah, so they are pulling all of those packs into the Soul Essences. It's also important to note that that door actually does end up opening after you do end up downing Heartsbane Triad, and Nerf hit 1% health there. That was actually so close for him to going down, but he does end up recovering, and it looks like they're actually going to be able to maybe pull this pull off here.
And we just said how dangerous it is for the tanks right now, and he just can't get out of that four stack of Grievous as JB's just pumping so much healing to him. Finally, some defense comes up for Method NA in the form of some peeling from the rest of the team. We have Ursula's Vortex go up. We should see a bump from the Typhoon. There it is. And I'm not sure if they used the Ring of Peace yet, but if they didn't, it will be available to them. It's something that we see on the side of Abrakeydabra as Divine Field just kind of gets away from all those raging mobs. So much damage comes in from them. And I did want to comment on this, but not before I saw for myself for sure. But technically, Nerf Clap did actually die there. His Trinket did proc. He does have that one Somebody's Bargain proc on there. Won't be available again for 6 minutes. And if Method NA does some of those risky pulls that we saw, especially combining Matron Brindle along with the second boss and the Reaping Wave at 40%, that not having that trinket could be a big problem for Nerf Clap.
Yeah, we actually saw Nerf kind of scrambling and trying to play more defense, while we did see Divine there going pretty much full offense. He ended up doing like way more damage than Nerf. I think he ended up spiking all the way at 150k DPS, so really sitting in there using his avatar and his Thunderclap in order to be able to DPS down the mobs quickly, as Abrakeydabra does a huge pull in the courtyard here, while it's being mirrored with very similar pull on the side of Method NA.
Yeah, interesting to see that both of these teams and Method, you all have the exact same strategy so far. Backtracking with the captains into the first room with the horrors, doing a very aggressive pull here in the courtyard as well. We'll have to see if they're all on the checkpoint or check mark. We know Method NA is. We'll have to see what Abrakeydabra does to pull the second Reaping Wave on top of the Soulbound Goliath along with Matron Brindle. So we will see soon exactly what comes to fruition for these two teams. Method NA dealing with their first Reaping Wave that Abrakeydabra is dealing with, but Divine Field taking a fair bit of damage as he leaps back across all the mobs, getting the Dispel from Elstrat with all these Reaping Souls coming in, but he just can't get out of his Grievous stack right now. Ramps up to 4, residual damage hitting the rest of the group, something that we saw be quite detrimental to some of the teams earlier as well, but a lot of healing needed from Elstrat, manages to get safely through it, and it looks like they've mostly settled down with this first Reaping pack. Method NA, though, still dealing with a Rune Weaver and a bunch of the Reaping.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra actually, it looks like they kind of deviated from the pull strategy that Method NA did. Abrakeydabra actually ended up grabbing some of those guards on the right-hand side through that doorway, while Method NA ends up just kind of dealing with the Reaping. It looks like one of the mobs, it looks like the Rune Weaver ended up having that Soul Effigy on it. It might have actually been an Acolyte that ended up transforming, and if that was the case, then that would actually be pretty bad, because that would actually mean that Method NA ended up losing count for that mob.
Yeah, that's super scary with the Soul Fetish, that 50% extra damage and haste on that mob. That's why it was glowing blue there, and Nerf Clap was just desperately trying to get away from it. Fortunately, no extra deaths on the side of Method NA. No more extra deaths on the side of Method NA. They've already had to use their battle res and have 2 deaths on the board right now, so it's already getting a bit sloppy for them, and their backs are up against the wall as Nerf Clap does not have the trinket available. Yoda does not have the cheat death available. The team is very vulnerable right now. No battle res is available on the board, so things are looking much better right now for Abrakeydabra versus the Method NA side.
Yep, and Abrakeydabra, you do see Divine Field popping his Lightfoot Potion, doing a little bit smaller of a pull than we did see out of the both of the Method teams this week. And he doesn't end up pulling it all the way down the hallway and pulling the archers into it, but he does end up pulling a pretty sizable amount of those maggots as well. We actually did see Divine Field end up proccing his cheat death trinket in the Bonsomni's bargain there a little bit earlier, so he does not have that available at his disposal. So maybe he might elect to pull a little bit more conservatively. Somehow I doubt it. I think he's just full steam ahead there.
Yeah, full steam ahead, and if both teams are kind of teetering on the edge of this very aggressive pull with the second Reaping, Soulbound Goliath, Matron Brindle, and the trash surrounding her, then both tanks are going to be in that really vulnerable state without the trinket. So we might have a couple tank deaths on either side here. We'll have to see advantage in some sense to Abrakeydabra that they do have the battle res, but hopefully they're not planning for the tank death, because that's a pretty bad strategy to kind of form around you right now. And here it goes right now. Brindle getting pulled along with the Soulbound Goliath on Method and A side. They haven't procced their Reaping just yet. They will be doing so once those Jagged Hounds on the side die. That'll be easy kills for them as the Reaping now starts spawning for Method and A side and starts invading the side of their screen with Soulbound Goliath on top of Nerf Clap. There is Matron Brindle in there and a Thorn Shaper. You need to make sure Soul Fetish does not go off on Matron Brindle. It'd be absolutely disastrous with the kind of pull they've just done here. Abrakeydabra moving pretty slow here. I'm not really sure what's going on with them. They still haven't procced their second Reaping or pulled the boss yet, and they were a bit ahead of Method and A.
Yeah, they're just doing some of the hallway pulls with their trash, just a little bit slower than we have seen out of both of the Method teams ending up being today. Method and A obviously pulling Matron Brindle into Soulbound Goliath, a very tank-heavy pull. We do see Nerf. He looks like he does have access to that Bonsomni's bargain trinket again, so that will give him a little bit more survivability if they do, when they do end up proccing their Reaping, or whenever they did end up proccing their Reaping, and it allows him to be able to tank Matron Brindle and Soulbound Goliath just with a little bit more peace of mind, as he does get incredibly low there, resetting the Soulbound Goliath with the fire, but JB does have to pop that Tranquility in order to be able to top everybody up through that Grievous and through that fire.
Scary moment there for Method and A, but they managed to recover. Abrakeydabra doing the same aggressive pull with the second Reaping on top of the pack. Matron Brindle to boot with the Soulbound Goliath too. Now, Divine Field does not have that trinket available. I believe the aura just phased during this boss encounter. We clearly saw it proc during the trash, so we know it's on cooldown right now. So it begs the question, maybe Nerf Clap doesn't have his available either right now. Nonetheless, the tanks are very vulnerable on this fight. Method and A has managed to stabilize. Matron Brindle is dead, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, we can see her Reaping Ghost on the side there, and Soulbound Goliath has hit 42% for them. Abrakeydabra, I'm not really sure what held them up with some of that hallway trash. They did deal with some of those Gorgers, and they're just so slow to kill because they have a high amount of health. They jump around in all directions, so it took them a bit too long to get this pull started, and unfortunately they find themselves a fair bit behind Method NA, even beyond the 2 deaths, 10 seconds on the board.
Yeah, Method NA just ends up dealing with this courtyard just a little bit quicker, consolidating it, taking it in one less pull overall, and that you do see that reflected in the difference in Soulbound Goliath's health here. Obviously Method NA sitting at about 20% and Abrakeydabra sitting at about 50-ish, so you do see that just in the differential between the two, but it won't end up mattering in the end. It does end up coming down to who ends up making more mistakes, and we have some really big pulls coming in Raw's room to really define these two teams here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's going to be big. Well, hang on. We didn't see Method and A actually do that pull. We saw them split up the 60% Reaping wave and then do the full roll pull. So not combining them together as we've seen Team D and Method EU do so. We'll have to see if that was up their sleeve the entire time, but they knew that they were comfortably ahead last time, so maybe they opted not to do it. This time, Abrakeydabra certainly is on their heels much closer than their previous Manor series. So Method and A now moving back into the hallway for Raw, and will get a pull going that will put them, probably the entire hallway here, that will put them just sub 60%. After which they will grab the rest of it, and JB, should they pull the Raw room with the Reaping, will need to have a little drink with his Shadow Meld.
Yep, and you do see Nerf end up running up those stairs just a little bit in order to be able to line of sight those mobs, in order to be able to just get a little bit of separation from them. You actually do see Lighty drop that Ring of Peace just a little bit early in order to allow the mobs just to get grouped up super easily for Shakib to be able to dunk those mobs into the ground here with this Unholy Death Knight. We're on the side of Abrakeydabra. They are just finally downing Soulbound Goliath with Divine Field dropping so low there.
Oh, they're just gambling at this point. This is usually when I know how this works out. The tank goes, I got this, don't worry. We don't need a reset anymore. It's low percent, but I also don't want to use any of my heavy resources like shield while knowing some of the pulls coming up right there. So you kind of took a bit of a risk there. It worked out for them. They didn't get toppled off. We do see that he still doesn't have that trinket available now that we're out of the boss fight. Similar pull coming in here from Abrakeydabra as they start to prepare their third Reaping wave, which likely they hope, and we hope, that they will drag into the boss room. Same with Method and A here as they slowly build up the stairs. 54% trash for them. Abrakeydabra 48% trash.
Yeah, we actually do see Abrakeydabra just taking it a little bit quicker, not using that Ring of Peace, not being patient with all those maggots, and we actually do see them taking the pull, just like a very similar pull between the two teams, but he just ends up taking it a little bit slower on the side of Method and A here. Abrakeydabra here ending up dealing with the last couple maggots and making sure that they don't get freezing trapped there, as you do see it on your screen here, while Method and A is dealing with some of these survivalists in this room as well.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra 55%. Now, these maggots will not proc their Reaping Wave, so they're going to pull just 3 mobs here. They're going to kite it back towards Rawl's room and kind of dance them around in front of Rawl's room entrance just to make sure that they kill them at the same time and proc that Reaping. But actually a rather aggressive pull coming in here. Usually you only see a 3 pull just to get to 60%, but they end up pulling the rest of the room together and cleaving it down. Watch that Frost Trap. Move, boys, move. Making sure that they don't get frozen on top of it while still trying to maintain effective cleave on top of them. But they're running out of space in terms of melee distance from the mobs. So Divine Field, they're either going to need a bump with a Ring of Peace or the Typhoon, or they're going to need to line of sight around the corner to get some of those ranged mobs away from there. 58% for Abrakeydabra as Method NA has procced their Reaping and is doing the full room pull right now that we saw Method EU do. And here we go. Keep an eye on the Unholy DK's damage as Bloodlust has popped. A lot of damage coming in on Nerf Clap right now as the third Reaping Wave invades along with all of the trash in Rawl's room.
Yeah, and we do see Shakib spike up all the way up to 600k DPS. We actually did see the Ring of Peace coming out a little bit preemptively, and JP does end up going down. This is so bad. They do end up having a battle res because of the Death Knight, but then Nerf ends up going down, and then Method A is going to wipe here.
Method NA is going to wipe. The pull was just too mighty for them right now as a full team wipe comes in, but Abrakeydabra answers suit on the left side. They get the Rawl rolling right now as they pull everything in the room together, getting as much damage out as they can. They know they have a finite amount of time before Divine Field just runs out of cooldowns. Trinket procs again. Underrot doing as much healing as he can to make sure that he's keeping the tank healthy through all of this raging going on right now. Divine Field dipping so low, hops back across, needs to stay in melee range of the boss because the boss is static in place there and will melee one of them, but he goes down and we get the battle res coming out. It's too late though as Ashine goes down. Swagfist now, Dr. J goes down. All full wipe coming out of Abrakeydabra on the left side here as well. It is just too much for these teams to dance with as Method NA has released and come back into the room. Fortunate for both of these teams is that they've killed most of the trash and Reaping associated with this massive pull, but it was just not enough. And the peak damage that we saw, for instance, from the Unholy DKs did not reach some of the 1 mil DPS that we saw in previous series. Yes, yes. That's funny titles. He did the Dr. Evil thing. But also the tanks just couldn't hang with the damage. They ultimately just got down. Some of it was because the DPS was a fair bit lower and the mobs just lived too long. The tanks don't have unlimited shield wall resources where they could just face tank these enraged mobs.
Yeah, it looks like Method NA actually has a really big pull in a Raw still, even though they did pop the Bloodlust. Nerf ends up going down again. They don't have a battle res available, and they're going to end up wiping one more time. Even though Abrakeydabra did the hold my beer, I'm about to throw as well, it looks like this is actually going to be okay for Abrakeydabra because they only have like 1 or 2 mobs that they end up having to pull in a Raw, while Method NA had like half the room still left available to them.
Abrakeydabra is definitely very stable here. The only kind of next choke point in the fight here will be the Steward that comes in and ultimately some of this trash that's going to proc their 4th Reaping Wave, including the maggots from the kitchen, but they have control over when they will proc that 4th Reaping Wave, so they want to make sure they're nice and ready for that. A lot of enraged damage coming in on Divine Field as finally they down those 2 Banquet Stewards, which deal a fair bit of damage to the tank innately, but when they're enraged, especially if we don't get the Soothe cast off from Elstrat, who's busy making sure Divine Field's nice and healthy, it can be detrimental. 14th time's the chart here for Method NA as they pull once again into Rawl with a lot of the trash coming up, but every time they've kind of done this, more and more trash has been kind of killed on the side, so it's not as bad each time. It does get easier, but it's just costing them an immense amount of time, not only just because they have to run back every time, but they have deaths accruing on the board.
Yeah, I think the pull went wrong for Method NA the first time around with how early that Ring of Peace ended up coming out. It ended up separating the pack into like 2 or 3 different segments, and it allowed Shakib to not like get all the damage that he should have been able to get off on Raw and all the rest of the trash. So it ended up just costing them, but then they ended up having a couple deaths. As, JB does end up getting 2 stacks of that debuff there from those Pallid Gorgers, but he ends up being okay. That was actually very scary for JB.
Yeah, Gorgers do a lot of damage, and of course the Wretch Frontal is also hits quite heavily, but it is dodgeable. It does snapshot its direction, so you have to make sure to sidestep it, even in this limited melee space that the players have on the side of Method NA. Abrakeydabra has procced their 4th Reaping Wave and is dealing with it and some of the pull from the kitchen as we see the Ring of Peace defensively come down for Divine Field. They've dealt with it on top of Rawl. Now, Rawl, is, even in this fortified setting, is a fair bit of health, so 20%, if the tank goes down here, they're not going to be able to just kind of scrap DPS him for the remainder of the fight. Runeweaver in there as well, casting the full etch on purpose, players not interrupting it. Not really too dangerous of a cast, so they're trying to give their tank Divine Field a bit of breathing space by purposefully not interrupting that. Nerf Clap dipping a bit low here again, as Yoda does as well. A lot of attention and healing needed from JB just to make sure nobody else in the group dies.
Yeah, and we do see Rawl on the side of Abrakeydabra getting so close to death here, and they're going to be able to finish up their Rawl pull with only 1 full wipe, where on the side of Method NA, we do have 14 deaths coming through for them. So it's going to be a pretty sizable death differential with 40 seconds in the favor of Abrakeydabra here.
Method NA now 25% on roll as Abrakeydabra is indeed heading downstairs, dealing with the rest of that Runeweaver. It will be the remaining percentage that we've seen from the other teams needed. After this, they will just stealth through the entire basement area and pop up in Lord and Lady Waycrest boss room. There will be a substantial trash pull in there, but the reality will be whether or not they decide to do the boss on top of it. That's where the real danger will come in. So we'll have to see what Abrakeydabra does here in just a moment. Raw finally stabilized on the side of Method NA as they reach 3% on the boss and will be heading downstairs soon as well. But their Runeweaver is a fair bit higher percentage health than his Abrakeydabras, and they need to finish that off before they're able to mass stealth down to the basement.
Yeah, but we do actually see similar percent coming in from both teams here. They are like running identical percentage going into the bottom part of this instance, and Abrakeydabra actually does end up pulling Lord and Lady Waycrest into this very massive trash pull as all the cooldowns come out, Bloodlust comes out, and they're starting to DPS down Lord and Lady Waycrest right here.
Yes, a lot of damage needed here, and a lot of damage incoming on the tank. Now, they have a couple of tricks up their sleeve, of course, in the form of things like Spell Reflect. Really well done to put that Ring of Peace down there as the warding candles go down from one of the Diviner, if I'm not mistaken. So now there's those candles, as long as you stand in them, including the boss, will decrease damage taken by 50%. So you got to get out of those as quickly as possible if you opt to do a pull like this with the boss in the trash. Trash has finally been deleted. Large amount of damage coming out of Ashine DK right now, just to make sure you delete all of the trash before you start to run out of space with the warding candles going down, and of course dancing around the arcane hits from Lady Waycrest as we see her playing her instrument there.
What is that instrument, like an organ maybe?
It looks like a guitar to me.
Okay, anyways, we do see Method NA doing a very similar pull with all the trash into Lord and Lady Waycrest as well. Whenever Lord Waycrest does go through 3 full cycles of getting down to 10% and then healing all the way back up to full, Lady Waycrest will spawn. You do see her hitting 10% health here. She will play her guitar one more time and then spawn out into the room at 10% health. Obviously, the health is very similar between the two mobs, even though it does show 10% for Lady Waycrest and 72% for Lord Waycrest here.
So Method NA, of course, wasting no time and doing the same thing here, pulling the trash with the boss, but they're just mimicking Abrakedabra's pulls at this point. Abrakeydabra, after this, of course, will get to the Gloom Horrors, the 7 of them, try to kind of delete those off the map. I'm not sure if they're going to be aggressive and pull it with Gorak Tool as well, which is what a method you do earlier, but Abrakeydabra, I mean, they're on the same boss. The trash is dead for both sides. Everything's safe, but the sheer death difference of 40 seconds for the 8 deaths between the two teams, I'm sure Abrakeydabra knows just how ahead they are at this point, so if I were them, I probably wouldn't risk the Gorak Tool pull and let Method have to make that kind of play to even try and catch up, because that is a very dangerous pull.
Yeah, we did actually see even Method EU struggling with that Gorak Tool pull just because of how much HP healing is actually required. Even if you are in such a good spot like Zalia was, it is still a scary pull, as Abrakeydabra does end up pulling these Gloom Horrors, and it looks very similar to like what you said. They're end up going to take it slow and steady. They might end up using the Ring of Peace here in a second, as Elsarat is not on the screen right here, so the Gloom Horrors end up charging the furthest target. He actually does end up dropping his Ursul's Vortex, making sure to stand out of range so those get gripped back before they do end up hitting him. And Method NA here, DPSing down Lord and Lady Waycrest here, but they, like you said, they're just so far behind just because of the death differential between the two teams.
Yep, doing really well to coordinate. After the Ursul's Vortex, they, of course, coordinated the leg sweep from the Monk, followed by the Shockwave from the Warrior, stunning the mobs in place. And just as that ended, they put the Ring of Peace down. And at that point, you got to kill the mobs because you're out of crowd control, and your healer will die if too many of them jump on him. So well done by Abrakeydabra to do that as they move down to Gorak Tool, the final boss of the dungeon. Method NA still working on that 4th boss, and then still needs to deal with the Gloom Horrors as Nerf Clap procs his cheat death trinket here at the last moment on Lord Waycrest. Not going to have that available now for this dangerous pull. I'm not sure how Method NA handles their pull. It seems like they want to actually pull it upstairs to the rest of the room. Oh no, they're actually doing a skip with it downstairs. So Nerf Clap doesn't have the trinket available, but he is going to die on purpose unless he Shadow Melts here.
Yeah, this is actually looking
no, they're actually going for the big pull.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is actually looking still very good on the side of Abrakeydabra. They are obviously like 35% ahead of Method NA here, even though Method NA is doing a very large pull into Gorak Tool here. Neither teams obviously have lost because they ended up, actually Method NA ended up not using their Bloodlust on that Lord and Lady Waycrest pull, which even makes that pull even more impressive from their side. But you do see Abrakeydabra here DPSing down Gorak Tool, sitting at 50%. It looks like they just might end up taking it here.
Yeah, they're likely going to take it. I mean, this is a super dangerous pull. Nerf Clap finally pops a shield wall. Everything's in raging right now. He doesn't have the trinket available. The cheat death trinket had just procced on the boss prior right now. They need to kill these Gloom Horrors before that shield wall runs out, or Nerf Clap's just going to run out of resources. And finally, they managed to start killing most of them off. So Nerf Clap is safe, and they do manage to get that rest of the pull. No death from the tank. They do have the battle rest available. It just came out. Fortunately, they don't need to use it. So now they're stuck doing the boss the traditional way, one-on-one, like the rest of the group is doing here on Abrakeydabra. But unfortunately, 45 seconds left on Bloodlust for Method and A will not be their saving grace. And even with that, they're just way too behind on deaths.
Yep, and with the Gorak tool hitting 15%, they're no longer killing any of these slavers anymore. They're just kind of committing to the Gorak tool kill. And they're going to end up pushing themselves in the upper bracket finals versus Method EU here with I wouldn't say it was the cleanest Waycrest Manor, but it was definitely Method NA's final resting place.
The clean is a horrible overstatement. That was an absolute bloodbath between the two teams. That Rawl, the Butcher Room, I mean, he's the Butcher for a reason. He just chopping everyone up right there. But Abrakeydabra, finally, the team that we want to see, minus the Raw Room, coming through for the 2-1 victory, stays in the upper bracket and sends Method and A downstairs.
Abrakeydabra is going to be moving on to play up against Method EU tomorrow. And interestingly enough, seeing both teams there, Sours, trying to execute the same pull that Method EU did perfectly earlier, it just kind of sets a statement for where these teams are at compared to that #1 seed.
Yeah, the raging on that pool is so dangerous. That's kind of what killed Abrakeydabra, unfortunately, on their wipe. And luckily, they only had 1 wipe compared to Method E's 2 wipes, which is really what you can't afford to have happen. After the first wipe, Method NA was still kind of okay, actually. I think they could have still come back at that point. But then they got a little bit overzealous. They're like, okay, we've got to get in there again. And then they had a second wipe, and that second wipe was just way too costly. And you really just can't afford to have 2 massive wipes like that on Tavral. So here's the first wipe. JB goes down, and luckily they've got a Death Knight this time, so they're able to res him back up. But then Nerf goes down just a second later, and then they were not looking good from here. They're just going to quickly wipe it up, and they've got to get back in there to pull again. Looks like they think they get a reset off maybe there. And so then they get in again. And then Nerf just goes down again. He's got 4 stacks of Grievous. He's getting punched by everything. Ring of Peace isn't enough. He didn't quite get out of range. He just goes down again. And then the whole team follows shortly after. And that was all she wrote for Method NA. And Abrakeydabra was able to coast on that one all the way to the finish line and get a nice map 3 win out of there. Reverse sweep out of Abrakeydabra. Very impressive.
I mean, when you have a pull of that size, you know, usually when the tank dies in a multi-mob pull, especially high percentage, it's over at that point. Even if you res the tank immediately, there's no AoE taunt in the game right now. Everything's running, everyone killing out. But in a pull that size, just one member dying with the amount of damage. What are you laughing?
Brewmaster.
Are you talking about AoE taunt?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I don't see a Brewmaster running a statue in M+ right
Bubble
now.
taunt.
And so he's not playing, so he's not playing Prop Pally.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, in most situations here, right, you're not going to rely on a 5-minute cooldown on a class that doesn't exist in the MDI. These Prot Warriors, I should have said Prot Warriors, all right, I'm sorry. These Prot Warriors don't have an AoE taunt. As soon as they go down, it's over. But in a pull of this size, of this caliber, just even one person dying, I mean, part of the issue is exactly what Tettles mentioned, that they even had their first wipe in the first place. Shakib did not get the damage that he needed on that pull. And then just the tank ran out of gas at that point.
And that's all she wrote. When we saw the Method NA wipes, let's take a little bit look at the Abra wipe going into this one, Sour.
It's exactly what you just said, Sloot, where they just ran out of gas. So Divine Field goes down, and you see all of these low mobs here with Raging, and they just go around one-shotting the DPS one at a time. And then when you have all of your DPS dead with 1 battle res at 75% on a boss, that's all she wrote. They have to wipe it up here. And so when you just barely miss the kind of damage check of killing everything inside of your cooldown window, then you run out of cooldowns. And when you don't have any cooldowns right now in this expansion, your damage is very low. So like outside of those big cooldown burst windows, there isn't really a lot going on for them to be able to kill these mobs. I guess Outlaw Rogues don't really have cooldowns. They just kind of do big damn all the time. Maybe they needed a 5 roll. That could have actually saved them there, but they didn't get it, and they ended up wiping, unfortunately. But didn't matter because they still won the game.
Yeah, and at that point, it's just on the tanks and healers to be able to have the coordination with the CC to be able to survive. But with Abrakeydabra moving on, they will be going up against Method EU tomorrow in the upper finals, whereas Method NA and 40K are in those lower quarters, waiting to see who is going to win in the next 2 series that we have coming up here.